At my daughter's graduation ceremony, something happened that changed the course of our lives forever. It wasn't the speeches or the diplomas or even the tears of proud parents. It was the moment they called my daughter a failure. And what happened? When a CEO unexpectedly stood up from the back row and silenced the entire auditorium. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I still remember sitting there in that uncomfortable folding chair, program crumpled in my sweaty palms, my heart pounding against my ribs as I watched my only child, Sophia, sitting with the other graduates. She wasn't wearing honor cords or special distinctions like many of her classmates. Her cap was plain, adorned only with a small silver pin, a tiny shooting star I'd given her when she was 12, a reminder to always reach beyond what seemed possible. The auditorium of Westridge High was packed to capacity, the June heat making the air conditioning struggle to keep up. Parents fanned themselves with programs, whispered proudly to each other, and pointed out their children among the sea of identical blue gowns. I sat alone in the middle section, row 14, an empty seat beside me where my late husband should have been. David had always believed in Sophia when no one else did, not even her teachers, and certainly not me in my weakest moments. Principal Matthews approached the podium, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the light as he adjusted the microphone. "Before we begin presenting diplomas," he announced, his voice echoing through the space, "I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our top academic achievers." A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Parents straightened in their seats, cameras at the ready. I watched Sophia's shoulders tense slightly. She'd known this moment was coming. We'd discussed it at breakfast that morning over untouched plates of scrambled eggs. "It's fine, Mom," she'd said, pushing the food around with her fork. "I don't need them to call my name." On stage, Principal Matthews began reading from a list. For outstanding academic achievement, maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA throughout their high school career. He called out 5 names, then 10. Students stood to thunderous applause. For exceptional performance in STEM subjects, another list. For excellence in humanities and languages, more names, more applause. Sophia remained seated, her eyes fixed straight ahead. I felt a familiar ache spreading through my chest, the same pain I'd carried for years watching my daughter struggle in a system that never understood her unique brilliance. Then came the moment that would ignite everything that followed. Vice Principal Hargrove stepped forward, taking the microphone from Principal Matthews. Victoria Hargrove, with her perpetually pursed lips and steel-gray bob, who had called me into her office more times than I could count over the years. "As we celebrate these exceptional achievements," she began, her voice crisp and cutting, "I think it's important to acknowledge that education isn't just about who earns the highest marks." She paused, scanning the crowd. "Some students face challenges that make traditional academic success difficult to achieve." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly where this was going. We have students who, despite consistent intervention and accommodations, have struggled to meet our standards. Her eyes landed directly on the section where Sophia sat. Students who, by conventional metrics, might be considered failures in our system. A murmur rippled through the audience. Did she really just use the word failures at a graduation ceremony? But we at Westridge believe in celebrating all journeys, even those that don't culminate in academic distinction. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which is why we're proud that every student on this stage will receive a diploma, today, regardless of their academic standing. The silence that followed felt charged, uncomfortable. Parents shifted in their seats. A few coughed awkwardly. I stared at Sophia's back, willing her to keep her composure. Her spine was straight, her head held high, but I could see the slight tremble in her shoulders. Vice Principal Hargrove wasn't finished. I'd like to specifically acknowledge students like Sophia Reynolds, who persevered despite significant learning challenges and managed to meet our minimum graduation requirements. Sophia, would you stand? My heart stopped. This wasn't acknowledgement. It was public humiliation disguised as recognition. Sophia slowly rose to her feet, her face impassive, though I knew her well enough to see the storm brewing behind her eyes. A smattering of awkward applause followed. Sophia has demonstrated that even students with severe dyslexia and processing disorders can complete high school, Hargrove continued, her voice dripping with a condescension masked as compassion. And while she won't be continuing to higher education like most of her peers, she has secured an entry-level position at a local cafe, which is certainly commendable given her limitations. I felt my face burning with rage and shame. How dare she? How dare she reduce my daughter's incredible journey to a patronizing footnote? Sophia had fought harder than anyone in that room to be standing on that stage. The countless nights bent over textbooks, tears streaming down her face as letters jumbled and swam before her eyes. The tutors we couldn't afford but somehow paid for by cutting back on everything else. The diagnosis that came too late, the accommodations that were implemented half-heartedly by teachers who had already decided she just wasn't trying hard enough. And now, on what should have been one of the proudest days of her life, this woman was ensuring everyone knew exactly how little she thought of my daughter's achievements. I gripped the seat beneath me, knuckles white, fighting the urge to stand up and scream the truth. That my daughter wasn't a charity case or a token of the school's inclusivity, that she was brilliant in ways their standardized tests could never measure, that her mind could see patterns and solutions that escaped their rigid thinking. But before I could move, something unexpected happened. There was a sharp sound from the back of the auditorium, a chair scraping against the floor as someone stood abruptly, heads turned. A tall figure moved deliberately down the center aisle toward the stage. At first, I thought it might be a parent unable to contain their outrage at Hargrove's speech. But as the figure came into the light, murmurs spread through the crowd. I recognized her immediately, even though I'd only ever seen her on magazine covers and news segments. Eliza Matsuo, founder and CEO of Neuroverse, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. What was she doing at our small-town graduation ceremony? Ms. Matsuo walked with quiet confidence to the foot of the stage, her tailored charcoal suit a stark contrast to the casual attire of most parents. Vice Principal Hargrove faltered mid-sentence, clearly thrown by the interruption. "Excuse me," Ms. Matsuo said, her voice carrying easily without the microphone. "I believe I have something relevant to add to this conversation." The principal hesitated, then gestured for her to come up. A buzz of confusion and excitement rippled through the crowd. Students craned their necks to see better. Parents whispered to each other, "Who was this woman? Why was she here?" Ms. Matsuo ascended the stairs to the stage with graceful precision. Vice Principal Hargrove reluctantly stepped aside, though confusion was evident on her face. I glanced at Sophia, who had retaken her seat. Her expression was unreadable, though her posture had changed. She was sitting forward now, alert and focused. "Good afternoon," Ms. Matsuo began, her voice warm but authoritative. "My name is Eliza Matsuo. I'm the founder and CEO of Neuroverse Technologies. I wasn't scheduled to be here today, but I received something a few months ago that made this graduation impossible for me to miss." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out what looked like a folded piece of paper. "This is a project proposal that was submitted anonymously to our Young Innovators Challenge. We receive thousands of entries from around the world each year, most from PhD candidates and graduate students at elite universities." She unfolded the paper carefully. This one stood out immediately. It outlined a revolutionary approach to adaptive learning technology for neurodivergent thinkers. a system that actually works with different brain patterns rather than trying to force standardization. My breath caught in my throat. I knew exactly what she was holding. Our entire research team was impressed by the insight, innovation, and deep understanding of both technology and the neurodivergent experience evident in this proposal. We spent weeks trying to identify the author, who had submitted it under the pseudonym Starchaser. Tears began to blur my vision as Ms. Matsuo continued. Imagine our surprise when we traced it back to a high school senior from Westridge, high with no formal training in programming or neuroscience. She looked directly at Sophia, a student who, despite being labeled with learning challenges, had taught herself coding late at night after finishing her regular homework, using only free online resources and borrowed textbooks. The auditorium had gone completely silent. Every eye was now trained on Sophia, who sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Ms. Reynolds," Eliza Matsuo said, addressing Sophia directly, "would you join me on stage, please?" Slowly, Sophia stood and made her way to the stairs. I could see she was trembling slightly, but her steps were steady. As she reached Ms. Matsuo's side, the CEO placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I came here today to personally offer Sophia a full scholarship to our Neuroverse Institute of Technology and Innovation, as well as a paid apprenticeship on our adaptive learning team." She turned to face the audience. But after hearing how this extraordinary young woman was just characterized by her own school administration, I feel compelled to add something else. Ms. Matsuo's expression hardened slightly as she addressed the crowd. "The term failure has been thrown around rather carelessly here today. So let me be clear about what failure actually looks like." She gestured toward Vice Principal Hargrove and Principal Matthews. "Failure is an educational system that prioritizes standardized metrics over actual learning. Failure is educators who mistake different for deficient. Failure is the arrogance of believing that there's only one path to success or one way to demonstrate intelligence." The tension in the room was palpable. I could see Vice Principal Hargrove's face flushing red, while the principal looked increasingly uncomfortable. What Sophia Reynolds has achieved isn't just commendable given her limitations, as was so condescendingly stated. It's extraordinary by any standard. While juggling the demands of a curriculum that wasn't designed for her brain type, she conceptualized and developed a technological framework that our most experienced engineers believe could help millions of neurodivergent learners worldwide. Ms. Matsuo turned to look at Sophia, her expression softening. "That's not failure. That's the kind of brilliance that changes the world." The applause began slowly, tentatively, then built until it shook the room. Parents were standing. Students were cheering. I sat frozen in my seat, tears streaming down my face as I watched my daughter, my beautiful, brilliant, misunderstood daughter, finally being seen for who she truly was. Through the blur of my tears, I saw Sophia reach up to touch the small silver star pinned to her graduation cap, our private symbol of perseverance, of reaching beyond what seemed possible. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders, the burden of doubt, of quiet desperation, of wondering if I had failed her by not fighting harder against a system that never understood her. As the applause continued, Sophia stepped up to the microphone. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, so different from the frustrated, tearful girl who had struggled to read aloud in class all those years ago. "Thank you, Ms. Matsuo," she said. "But there's someone else who needs to be recognized. Today." Her eyes found me in the crowd. My mother, Sarah Reynolds, who never gave up on me even when everyone else had written me off, who worked 2 jobs to pay for specialists when the school insisted I just wasn't trying hard enough, who sat with me every night at our kitchen table, helping me find different ways to understand the material when the traditional methods failed. Now it was my turn to tremble, to feel exposed as all heads turned in my direction. My mom was told by experts that I would probably never graduate high school, Sophia continued. She was advised to lower her expectations, to accept my limitations. Instead, she taught me that different doesn't mean less, that my brain isn't broken. It just processes information in its own unique way. I pressed my hand against my mouth, overwhelmed by the moment. Memories flooded back. Kindergarten teachers suggesting Sophia might be slow. Third-grade parent-teacher conferences where I was told she was falling behind. Middle school IEP meetings where goals were continually lowered. The pediatric neuropsychologist who finally diagnosed her dyslexia and processing disorders in 8th grade, far too late to prevent years of damage to her self-esteem. And through it all, the glimpses of extraordinary thinking that no one else seemed to notice. The way she could disassemble and reassemble any electronic device without instructions. How she could look at a complex system and immediately identify inefficiencies. The beautiful, intricate diagrams she drew to make sense of concepts she couldn't process through text alone. My mom is the reason I'm standing here today, Sophia said, her voice growing stronger. Not just graduating, but graduating with a future brighter than anyone in this room could have predicted. She was the one person who saw potential where others saw only problems. Vice Principal Hargrove stood awkwardly to the side, her earlier confidence deflated. Principal Matthews looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. And I was simultaneously falling apart and being rebuilt, cell by cell, word by word, as my daughter spoke her truth to a room that had never been willing to hear it before. As Sophia finished speaking, Eliza Matsuo returned to the microphone. I think, she said with a smile, that this is exactly why our Young Innovators program exists, to find brilliant minds that traditional systems often miss. She turned to the school administrators. Thank you for hosting me today. I look forward to seeing what Sophia accomplishes at the Institute. The rest of the ceremony continued in a blur. Diplomas were handed out, tassels were turned, caps were thrown into the air. But the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. Every time Sophia's classmates looked at her now, it was with new eyes, with respect, curiosity, even awe. The Kai, teachers who had dismissed her for years, now seemed eager to make some connection, as though they had always believed in her potential. When the ceremony finally ended and the graduates began finding their families in the crowd, I stood waiting, uncertain, overwhelmed. Then Sophia was pushing through the crowd toward me, her blue gown billowing around her, her face alight with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Pure, unbridled joy. She threw her arms around me, nearly knocking me off balance. We did it. Mom, she whispered fiercely in my ear. We showed them. I held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. No, sweetheart, I whispered back. You did it. You showed them. I just had the good sense to see what was always there. Over Sophia's shoulder, I saw Ms. Matsuo making her way toward us, navigating through the crowd of celebrating families with purpose. When she reached us, Sophia reluctantly pulled away from our embrace, wiping tears from her cheeks. Mrs. Reynolds, Ms. Matsuo said, extending her hand to me. It's an honor to meet you. I took her hand, still slightly dazed by everything that had happened. Thank you for what you did today. I don't even know how to begin expressing my gratitude. She smiled, warm and genuine. Don't thank me. I'm the one who should be grateful. Talents like your daughter's are rare. When we find them, we need to nurture them, not force them into boxes that were never designed to fit them in the first place. Vice Principal Hargrove appeared at the edge of our small circle, her expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and forced politeness. Ms. Matsuo, what a pleasant surprise to have you join us today. If we had known you were coming, we could have prepared a proper welcome. Ms. Matsuo turned to her with a measured smile. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from unplanned observations, wouldn't you agree? Hargrove's smile tightened, She turned to Sophia. "Congratulations, Ms. Reynolds. It seems you've found your path after all." Sophia met her gaze steadily. "I always knew my path, Ms. Hargrove. I just needed the freedom to walk it my own way." The vice principal nodded stiffly and retreated back into the crowd. As she walked away, I felt a lightness spreading through me, the unburdening that comes when the truth is finally spoken aloud, when vindication arrives after years of doubt and struggle. Ms. Matsuo turned back to us. "I hope you'll both join me for dinner tonight. We have much to discuss about Sophia's future at the Institute." As we made arrangements to meet later, I looked around the auditorium with new eyes. The place that had been the site of so many disappointments and battles over the years was now transformed in my memory. This would forever be the place where everything changed, where the world finally saw what I had always known, that my daughter wasn't broken or limited or failing. She was extraordinary in a way that defied conventional measurement. And as we walked out into the bright June sunshine, Sophia's hand firmly in mine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope, unbounded and luminous, stretching before us like an open road. My name is Sarah Reynolds, and for most of my adult life, I've been fighting battles that no one could see. Not the kind fought on battlefields with weapons and armor, but the quiet, desperate kind waged in school conference rooms with binders full of assessments and in our kitchen late at night with flashcards and tears. I became a mother at 22, young and unprepared, but fiercely in love with the tiny, perfect being who had entered my world. My husband David and I had met in college. He was studying engineering while I pursued a degree in elementary education. We were young, optimistic, and entirely unaware of how quickly life could change course. Sophia was born on a rainy April morning, a storm raging outside while inside the hospital room. A different kind of force of nature entered our lives. She was alert from the beginning, her dark eyes taking in everything, her tiny fingers grasping at the world with surprising strength. David would hold her for hours, pointing out patterns in the ceiling tiles, explaining how the hospital machines worked in the soft, patient voice he used for his most complex projects. "She understands," he would insist when I laughed at him, for explaining thermodynamics to our newborn. "Maybe not the words, but the patterns. Look at her eyes." And he was right. From the beginning, Sophia seemed drawn to patterns, to connections, to the hidden architecture of things. Before she could walk, she would spend hours arranging her blocks by color, shape, size, creating complex systems that seemed random to others but made perfect sense to her. The first signs that Sophia processed the world differently emerged in preschool. While other children were drawing stick figures and houses, Sophia was creating intricate, interconnected designs. Her art didn't look like the typical childhood scribbles. They resembled circuit boards, complex networks, systems in motion. "She has an unusual spatial awareness," her preschool teacher told us during a conference. "But I'm concerned about her social integration. She doesn't engage with the other children in typical ways." That was the first flag, the first suggestion that our daughter might not fit neatly into the expected boxes. David and I exchanged glances, but didn't worry too much. So she was unique. Wasn't that something to celebrate? Kindergarten brought more concerns. Sophia struggled with the alphabet, with recognizing letters and their sounds. Numbers made sense to her. She could count and even do simple addition in her head, but letters seemed to swim and shift before her eyes. "She's just not trying," her kindergarten teacher said during our first parent-teacher conference. "She's clearly bright enough. I think she might be acting out for attention." I remember the way my stomach knotted at those words, the first stirrings of the advocacy instinct that would come to define the next 12 years of my life. "She is trying," I insisted. "You should see her at home. She gets so frustrated she cries." The teacher's expression was skeptical. "Some children are just dramatic, Mrs. Reynolds." That night, I watched Sophia as she attempted to complete a simple worksheet, tracing letters. Her small face was scrunched in concentration, her knuckles white around the pencil. After 10 minutes of struggle, she crumpled the paper and threw it across the room, then burst into tears. "The letters won't stay still, Mommy," she sobbed. "They keep jumping around." I gathered her in my arms, rocking her gently as David picked up the crumpled worksheet and smoothed it out on the table. He studied it, his engineer's mind analyzing the problem. "Look at this," he said quietly, pointing to the letters she had traced. They veered off the lines, some backward, others irregularly sized. "This isn't laziness or drama. Something else is happening here." That was the beginning of our journey, the first step on a long road of evaluations, specialists, diagnoses, and interventions. We heard terms like developmental delay, possible processing disorder, attention issues, but no one seemed able to put all the pieces together to see the complete picture of our daughter's brilliant, beautiful, differently wired brain. First grade was harder. Second grade, harder still. By third grade, Sophia was being pulled out of class for remedial reading sessions, sitting at a separate table during writing exercises, falling further behind her peers academically while racing ahead of them in other, unmeasured ways. At home, she would build extraordinary structures with her building blocks, create complex systems with household objects, tell elaborate stories she couldn't write down. She had an intuitive understanding of how things worked, could take apart and reassemble her electronic toys, could look at a problem and see solutions that weren't obvious to anyone else. But none of that counted in school. None of that showed up on standardized tests. Then, just before Sophia's 9th birthday, our world fractured in an entirely different way. David, driving home late from a project meeting, was struck by a drunk driver who ran a red light. He died instantly, they told us. He didn't suffer. As if that was supposed to be a comfort, as I tried to explain to our 8-year-old daughter why her father would never come home again. The grief was bottomless, a well with no end. For months, I moved through life in a fog, functioning on autopilot. Get up. Get Sophia ready for school. Go to work at the elementary school where I taught 2nd grade. Pick up Sophia. Help with homework. Make dinner. Repeat. Sophia retreated into herself, speaking less. The frustration with school compounded by the devastating loss of her father. Her grades plummeted. Her behavior reports grew worse. Teachers who had once been sympathetic began to view her as a problem child. "She's acting out because of her father," they said, as if labeling the behavior somehow addressed it. "She'll adjust eventually." But she didn't adjust, at least not in the ways they expected. Instead, she found refuge in technology. David had left his old laptop behind, and Sophia claimed it, spending hours exploring its contents, learning how it worked. She was fascinated by the logic of it, the clear cause and effect, the way it responded exactly as instructed without judgment or frustration. By the time Sophia was 11, she had taught herself basic programming using free online courses. I would find her up late at night, the blue light of the screen illuminating her intent face as her fingers flew across the keyboard. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" I asked one night, finding her still awake at midnight. "Making the computer understand me," she replied without looking up. "It doesn't care if I can't spell right. It only cares if my logic is right." That simple statement broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. My daughter had found a language that made sense to her, a world where her unique way of thinking was an asset rather than a liability. But school remained a battleground. By middle school, the academic demands increased, and Sophia fell further behind in traditional subjects. While excelling in the computer science elective, the school reluctantly allowed her to take 2 years, early. "She has the highest scores I've ever seen in my coding class," her computer science teacher told me during a conference. "But she's failing language arts and barely passing social studies. Have you had her evaluated for learning disabilities?" We had, of course, multiple times, but the evaluations were expensive. The waiting lists for specialists covered by our insurance were months long, and the results were always inconclusive. Borderline. Needs further testing. Shows some characteristics of dyslexia but doesn't meet all criteria. It wasn't until Sophia was 14 in 8th grade that we finally got answers. I had taken on extra tutoring jobs to pay for a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation with a specialist not covered by our insurance. 3 days of intensive testing, thousands of dollars we couldn't afford, and finally, a clear picture emerged. Sophia has significant dyslexia, dysgraphia, and a visual processing disorder, the neuropsychologist explained, sliding a thick report across his desk. Her brain processes information differently, particularly language-based information. But her logical reasoning, pattern recognition, and spatial awareness are off the charts, literally above the 99th percentile. I remember the conflicting emotions that washed over me. Relief at finally having an explanation. Grief for all the years Sophia had struggled without proper support. Anger at a system that had failed to identify what now seemed so obvious. She's not broken, the doctor continued, seeing my expression. Her brain is just wired differently, and in some ways, that different wiring gives her extraordinary abilities. The challenge is helping her navigate a world, particularly an educational system, that isn't designed for minds like hers. Sophia, sitting beside me in the doctor's office, had a different reaction. As the doctor explained her test results, a slow smile spread across her face. "So, I'm not stupid," she said simply. The doctor looked startled. "Stupid? Quite the opposite. Your cognitive abilities are exceptional. You just process information differently than most people expect." On the drive home, Sophia was more animated than I had seen her in years. "It makes sense now, Mom," she said, staring out the window. "Why I could never make the letters behave. Why I can see how systems work but can't explain it in words. Why Dad always said I had an engineer's brain trapped in a poet's world." I reached across the console to squeeze her hand, tears blurring my vision. "He always saw you clearly, didn't he?" She nodded, her own eyes shining. "He would have figured it out sooner. He would have made them understand." "Well, now we understand," I said, straightening my shoulders. "And now we fight differently." Armed with the formal diagnosis, I returned to Sophia's school to request proper accommodations. The IEP meeting was scheduled. Reports were submitted. Plans were made. But the reality fell far short of what she needed. "We can give her extended time on tests," the special education coordinator explained, "and we can modify some assignments. But we don't have the resources for specialized instruction or assistive technology." "She needs text-to-speech software," I argued. "She needs alternative ways to demonstrate her knowledge beyond written essays." The coordinator's smile was patronizing. "Mrs. Reynolds, we have many students with special needs and limited resources. Sophia is actually doing quite well compared to some of our other cases. She's passing most of her classes." "Passing?" I repeated incredulously. "She has an IQ in the exceptionally gifted range. She shouldn't be passing. She should be thriving." But my protests fell on deaf ears. The school had done the minimum required by law, and in their view, that was sufficient. Sophia would receive some accommodations, but not the comprehensive support she needed, and so began the next phase of our battle. I became an amateur expert in learning disabilities, spent hours researching assistive technologies, used my teacher's discount to purchase software the school wouldn't provide. I stayed up late after my own teaching job to create modified materials for Sophia, to help her find ways around the barriers that traditional education placed in her path. We converted our small dining room into a specialized learning space. The walls were covered with visual aids, concept maps, diagrams, color-coded systems that helped Sophia organize information in ways her brain could process. We replaced our dining table with a standing desk where she could move freely while thinking, a weighted lap pad for focus, noise-canceling headphones to block distractions. It was during this time that Sophia's interest in technology deepened from curiosity to passion to purpose. She began exploring how computers could be programmed to adapt to different learning styles, how interfaces could be designed to accommodate various processing styles. "What if computers could learn how you learn?" she mused one evening as we worked together on a history assignment. "Instead of everyone having to learn like computers." That question became her North Star, guiding her through the turbulent years of high school. While her grades in traditional subjects remained mediocre despite our best efforts, her self-taught programming skills flourished. She spent every free moment coding, designing, testing ideas. By sophomore year, she had created a rudimentary program that converted text to interactive visual diagrams, a tool she used herself to make sense of her textbooks. By junior year, she had refined it and begun sharing it with a few other students who struggled with traditional text. "You should patent this," I suggested, after watching a classmate with ADHD use Sophia's program to successfully comprehend a chapter that had previously been impenetrable. Sophia shook her head. "I don't want to sell it, Mom. I want to make it better. I want to make it for everyone who thinks differently." High school remained a mixed experience. There were bright spots: the robotics club where her unique thinking was an asset, the computer science teacher who recognized her exceptional talent and gave her advanced projects, the handful of friends who appreciated her quirky brilliance. But there were dark valleys too: the English teacher who refused to accept her alternative format assignments, the guidance counselor who suggested she consider more realistic post-graduation plans than college, the vice principal, Victoria Hargrove, who never missed an opportunity to remind Sophia of her academic deficiencies. Hargrove was particularly relentless. She had been at Westridge High for decades, proud of the school's academic reputation, protective of its standing in district rankings. Students like Sophia, who didn't fit the traditional model of success but still demanded resources and attention, were, in her view, distractions from the school's core mission of excellence. "Not everyone is college material, Mrs. Reynolds," she told me during Sophia's junior year meeting. "We do a disservice to students when we don't help them set realistic expectations." "My daughter is absolutely college material," I countered, my hands clenched in my lap to keep from shaking with anger. "She just might not be your definition of college material." Hargrove's smile was thin. "Her grades and test scores suggest otherwise. I understand that's difficult for a parent to accept, but her grades and test scores reflect your failure to properly accommodate her learning differences," I interrupted, my teacher's deference to administration finally breaking under years of frustration. "They're a measure of your system, not her potential." That meeting ended with tense pleasantries and nothing resolved. As we walked to the car afterward, Sophia was quiet, shoulders hunched under the weight of others' limited perception. "She's wrong, you know," I said as we drove home. "About all of it." Sophia stared out the window, her reflection in the glass showing an expression too hard, too resigned for a 17-year-old face. What if she's not, though? What if I am just kidding myself? I can barely pass standardized tests. My essays are a mess even with speech to text. What college would want me? "Any college smart enough to see past the conventional metrics," I said firmly. "Any program interested in how you think, not just how you perform on arbitrary measures." But even as I spoke the words, doubt gnawed at me. I believed in my daughter's brilliance with every fiber of my being. I had witnessed her extraordinary mind, her innovative thinking, her persistence in the face of obstacles that would have defeated most adults. But I also knew the reality of a world that often required specific credentials, specific pathways, specific validations. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, I sat alone at our kitchen table, surrounded by college brochures and financial aid forms, and allowed myself a rare moment of complete vulnerability. I cried for the years of struggle, for the battles ahead, for the unfairness of a world that couldn't see my daughter's gifts, and yes, for David, who should have been beside me through all of this. When the tears subsided, I made a decision. If the traditional path wouldn't open for Sophia, we would forge a new one. I began researching alternative programs, smaller colleges with strong support for neurodivergent students, specialized tech, programs that focused on practical skills over academic credentials. Unknown to me, Sophia was forging her own path as well. During the winter of her senior year, while I was putting together applications for programs I thought might work for her, she was hunched over her laptop late into the night, working on something she kept carefully private. Just a project, she would say when I asked. Something I need to figure out for myself. I gave her the space she needed, understanding that after years of having to explain and justify and prove herself, this private work was something sacred, something that belonged to her alone. And so we continued through her senior year, me, fighting the visible battles with the school system, with college admissions offices, with financial aid departments, and Sophia fighting her own invisible battle, one keystroke at a time, late into the night when the rest of the world was asleep. We were both warriors in our own ways, armed with nothing but stubborn hope and the unshakable belief that different didn't mean less. That my daughter's unique mind wasn't a defect to be accommodated, but a gift to be unleashed. That somewhere, somehow, the world would eventually see what I had always seen. I just never imagined that moment of recognition would come on graduation day, in front of everyone who had ever doubted her, in a way that would change not just Sophia's future, but the futures of countless others whose brilliant minds didn't fit into neat, standardized boxes. That evening, after the graduation ceremony, Sophia and I sat across from Elisa Matsuo at Castellino's, the kind of upscale Italian restaurant we'd normally only visit for the most special occasions. The white tablecloths and soft lighting created an atmosphere that felt surreal after the emotional roller coaster of the day. Sophia was still wearing her graduation gown, having refused to take it off. "I earned this," she'd said simply when I suggested she might be more comfortable changing. Now, she sat with perfect posture, her eyes bright with a confidence I hadn't seen in years as she listened intently to Ms. Matsuo. "Your algorithm's approach to adaptive learning is genuinely revolutionary," Ms. Matsuo was saying, gesturing with an elegance that matched her precisely tailored suit. "Most educational technology tries to simplify content or present it in multiple formats. Your system actually learns how the individual brain processes information and adjusts in real time." Sophia nodded, not with arrogance, but with the simple acknowledgement of someone discussing a truth they'd always known. Traditional systems assume there's one right way to learn, with minor variations. But that's fundamentally flawed. There are entirely different cognitive architectures that require entirely different approaches. I watched them talk, these two brilliant women, one established and powerful, one just beginning her journey, discussing concepts that flew well beyond my understanding. Tech terms and neuroscience jargon flowed between them effortlessly. I should have felt out of place, but instead, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was the world Sophia belonged in, a world where her mind was not just accepted, but valued, where her different way of thinking was seen as an asset rather than a defect. "The Institute's fall semester begins in August," Ms. Matsuo said, turning to include me in the conversation. "But I'd like Sophia to start her apprenticeship next month if possible. We have summer housing available on campus for incoming students." "Next month?" I repeated, a small knot forming in my stomach. I'd spent so many years fighting for Sophia's future that I hadn't fully prepared myself for how quickly that future might arrive once the right doors opened. Sophia reached across the table and took my hand. "It's okay, Mom. I don't have to go right away." Ms. Matsuo watched our exchange with perceptive eyes. "The offer is flexible, of course. Family should always come first. I squeezed Sophia's hand and shook my head. No, next month is perfect. I just had a moment of mom panic. 18 years of having her under my roof, and suddenly, I smiled through the tightness in my throat. But this is exactly what we've been working toward. Which reminds me, Ms. Matsuo said, signaling to a waiter who approached with an elegant envelope. This is for you, Mrs. Reynolds. I accepted the envelope with confusion. For me? Open it, she encouraged. Inside was a formal letter on Neuroverse Institute letterhead. As I scanned the contents, my breath caught. A teaching position? Ms. Matsuo nodded. Our institute doesn't just train innovators. We're also developing new educational methodologies for neurodivergent learners, of all ages. Your experience as both an educator and the parent of a brilliant neurodivergent student makes you uniquely qualified to join our education division. If you're interested, of course. I stared at the letter, at the generous salary figure that would mean no more taking on extra tutoring jobs, no more skipping lunch to save a few dollars, no more lying awake at night worrying about bills. You planned this before you even met me, I said, looking up at her. She smiled. I did my research. When I discovered Sophia's proposal and learned about her background, I naturally became curious about the parent who had supported her against so many obstacles. Your teaching credentials are impressive, your advocacy for your daughter even more so. The Institute needs people like you as much as it needs innovators like Sophia. Across the table, Sophia was watching me with shining eyes. We could still be together, Mom, just in a new place, a better place. The waiter arrived with our entrees, giving me a moment to compose myself. As he set down plates of handmade pasta that would have been an almost impossible luxury just that morning, I glanced around the restaurant and caught sight of a familiar figure at a corner table. Vice Principal Hargrove was dining alone, her back rigid, her eyes occasionally darting toward our table. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the day's events. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I expected to feel triumph or vindication, but instead, I felt something unexpected. Compassion. How limiting it must be, I thought, to see the world only through the narrow lens of conventional achievement, to miss the extraordinary because it didn't fit predetermined criteria. In that moment, I didn't see an enemy. I saw someone trapped in a system as rigid and unforgiving as the expression on her face. I nodded slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to our table. Some battles weren't worth fighting anymore. We had found our path forward, and it led away from Westridge High, away from narrow definitions of success, away from the need to prove ourselves to people who couldn't see beyond their own limited perspectives. The conversation flowed easily through dinner as we discussed logistics, opportunities, the beautiful campus of the Institute located in the rolling hills outside of Boston. Ms. Matsuo shared stories of other neurodivergent innovators who had found their place there. The astrophysicist with severe ADHD who had developed new models for tracking interstellar objects, the autistic software architect whose emotional recognition program was revolutionizing therapeutic approaches. Our mission is to create a world where neurological differences are recognized as essential to human innovation, she explained. Not problems to be fixed, but variations to be celebrated and harnessed. By the time dessert arrived, a weight I'd been carrying for years had lifted from my shoulders. The future that had always seemed like a distant hope, a fragile thing I had to protect and fight for, was suddenly solid and real, laid out before us like the elaborate chocolate creation. The waiter sat down with a flourish. As we prepared to leave, Ms. Matsuo handed Sophia a small box. A graduation gift. I hope you don't mind. Sophia opened it carefully. Inside was a sleek smartwatch, but clearly not a standard commercial model. Its design was elegant, minimalist, with a custom interface unlike anything I'd seen before. This is a prototype, Ms. Matsuo explained. Developed by our accessibility team. It has features designed specifically for processing differences, haptic rhythmic cues for time management, visual organization systems, even subtle sensory regulation assistance. We call it the Neuroverse Companion. You'll be helping us refine it further when you join the team. Sophia slipped it onto her wrist, her face alight with fascination. It's beautiful. Form and function in harmony, Ms. Matsuo said with a nod. Like the best minds. Outside. The restaurant, as we prepared to say our goodbyes until the following day's meeting to discuss details, Ms. Matsuo turned to me with a serious expression. There's something else you should know, Mrs. Reynolds, something that wasn't appropriate to mention during the ceremony today. Please, call me Sarah, I said, curious. Sarah, then. What I didn't say earlier is that Sophia's proposal wasn't just impressive, it was foundational. We've been working on adaptive learning technology for years, but her approach solved problems our team has been struggling with for nearly a decade. The apprenticeship I'm offering isn't charity or even just recognition of potential. It's an acknowledgement that she's already contributing at a level that most PhD candidates could only aspire to. I felt my eyes filling with tears again. After so many years of hearing what my daughter couldn't do, of watching her struggle in a system that wasn't designed for her, to hear her abilities not just praised, but valued at the highest professional level was overwhelming. We're going to integrate her framework into our core technology, Ms. Matsuo continued. With her permission, of course, which means that once it's developed and deployed, her work will help millions of neurodivergent learners around the world. Children who might otherwise fall through the cracks of traditional education will have tools that work with their natural cognitive patterns instead of against them. Sophia, who had been examining her new watch, looked up sharply. Really? Millions? Ms. Matsuo nodded. Really? Your idea isn't just clever, Sophia. It's world-changing. Later that night, in our small house that now felt different somehow, like a chrysalis we had outgrown, Sophia and I sat on the porch swing that David had installed when she was 5. The night was warm, filled with the sounds of early summer, insects and distant neighborhood voices. I never thought today would end like this, Sophia said, leaning her head against my shoulder like she used to do as a child. I was just hoping to get through graduation without anyone noticing me too much. I laughed softly. So much for that plan. Are you really okay with moving, Mom? With leaving your school, your friends? I considered the question, looking out at the familiar street where we had built our life. You know, I've been a teacher for 15 years. I went into education because I believed every child deserved the chance to learn in a way that worked for them. But the longer I stayed in the system, the more I realized how little freedom we actually have to meet individual needs. I turned to look at her, this extraordinary young woman who had emerged from all our struggles stronger and more determined than I could have imagined. The chance to help develop new approaches that could work for kids like you, to be part of something that might transform education for the better, that's the dream I didn't even know I could have. She nodded, understanding. I just don't want you to give up your life for mine. You've done that enough already. It's not giving up anything, I assured her. It's gaining everything. A new adventure for both of us. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, rocking gently in the swing. Then Sophia said quietly, I wish Dad could have seen today. He did, I said with certainty. Not the way we might have wanted, but he did. And he would have been so proud of you. Not just for the recognition or the opportunity, but for your resilience. For never giving up, even when it would have been so much easier to believe what they told you about yourself. She fingered the small silver star pin she had transferred from her graduation cap to her collar. Remember when he gave me this? Right after that awful parent-teacher conference in 3rd grade? I smiled at the memory. That night, After the teacher had detailed all the ways Sophia was falling behind, all the benchmarks she was missing, David had come home with a small velvet box. Inside was the silver star pin, simple but exquisitely crafted. He told me that stars don't follow the rules, Sophia continued. They don't grow in straight lines or fit into neat categories. They explode and collapse and become black holes, or neutron stars, or things we don't even have names for yet. And that's what makes the universe interesting. He always did have a way with metaphors, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't understand then. I just thought it was a pretty pin. She touched it gently. But I've worn it every day since he died. It reminded me that someone believed I could be more than what the test said. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. He believed. I believed. And now the world is starting to believe too. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already racing with lists, things to pack, arrangements to make, people to notify. Our meeting with Ms. Matsuo was scheduled for 10 a.m. at her hotel to sign the official paperwork and discuss the logistics of our move. I made coffee and was sipping it at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. Mrs. Reynolds, this is Victoria Hargrove. I wonder if we might speak briefly before your meeting with Ms. Matsuo today. I'll be at Riverside Park near the fountain at 8:30 if you're amenable. I stared at the message in disbelief. After everything that had happened at graduation, what could she possibly have to say? My first instinct was to ignore it, to move forward without looking back. But curiosity won out. I texted back a simple, "I'll be there," and went to wake Sophia. Vice Principal Hargrove wants to meet with me this morning, I told her as she stumbled into the kitchen, her hair a wild tangle. Any idea why? She shrugged, reaching for a bowl of cereal. Maybe she wants to apologize for being wrong about me for 4 years straight. That seems unlikely, I said with a wry smile. But I guess I'll find out. Will you be okay here for an hour or so? Mom, I'm 18 now. A high school graduate. A future tech innovator. I think I can handle being alone for an hour without burning the house down. I laughed and ruffled her hair. Fair point. I'll be back in time for us to head to the meeting together. Riverside Park was quiet at 8:30 on a summer morning, just a few joggers and people walking dogs. I spotted Vice Principal Hargrove immediately, sitting primly on a bench near the fountain, her posture as rigid as ever, despite the casual setting. Mrs. Reynolds, she said as I approached. Thank you for coming. I sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. What can I do for you, Ms. Hargrove? She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I owe you an apology. And Sophia as well, though I doubt she'd want to hear it from me directly. Of all the things I had expected, a straightforward apology wasn't one of them. I remained silent, waiting. What happened yesterday was illuminating, she continued. Seeing Sophia's work recognized at such a high level, understanding what she's been capable of all along, it's forced me to reevaluate many of my assumptions. About Sophia specifically, or about neurodivergent students in general? I asked. She met my eyes directly. Both. I've been in education for 32 years, Mrs. Reynolds. I've seen trends come and go, initiatives rise and fall. I've developed certain convictions about what constitutes academic potential. Convictions that excluded students like my daughter. She nodded, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. I believed I was being realistic, that it was kinder to steer students toward paths where they could succeed rather than setting them up for disappointment. But you were the one defining success, I pointed out, within very narrow parameters. Yes. The admission seemed to cost her something. I see that now, or I'm beginning to. A jogger passed us, the rhythm of his footfalls punctuating the awkward silence that followed. In the distance, the fountain's water caught the morning light, sending small rainbows dancing across the concrete. "I'm not telling you this to ease my conscience," she finally said. "Though I admit I've slept poorly since yesterday. I'm telling you because I want to make changes at Westridge. Real changes in how we identify and support students with different learning profiles." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "What kind of changes?" "For starters, comprehensive training for all staff on neurodiversity and learning differences, a review of our accommodation policies, investment in better assistive technologies." She straightened her shoulders. "And I'd like your input on all of it." "My input? I'll be moving to Boston with Sophia in a few weeks." "I'm aware. But you have insights and experiences that could be invaluable in reshaping our approach. You could consult remotely. Help us avoid making the same mistakes with other students that we made with Sophia." I studied her face, searching for signs of insincerity. What I saw instead surprised me. Genuine regret, yes, but also determination. The same steely resolve I'd always found so frustrating was now being redirected toward something constructive. "Why the change of heart?" I asked. "Is it just because Sophia was discovered by someone impressive? Would you be here if Ms. Matsuo hadn't shown up yesterday?" Hargrove winced slightly but answered honestly. "Probably not, at least not so quickly. The public nature of yesterday's events created an impetus for reflection that might not have happened otherwise." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "But it's not just about avoiding embarrassment. When I went home last night, I found myself thinking about how many other Sophias might have passed through our halls unrecognized. How many brilliant minds we might have failed to nurture because they didn't fit our model of success." It was unsettling. I understood then that this wasn't just professional damage control. This was a genuine moment of reckoning for someone whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "But my priority has to be Sophia right now, supporting her as she starts this new chapter." "Of course." Hargrove reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "My personal contact information is on the back. When you're settled, if you're willing, I'd be grateful for your perspective." As I took the card, she added, "And please tell Sophia, tell her I was wrong, and that Westridge will be better for other students because of her." I nodded, tucking the card into my pocket. "I'll tell her." As I walked back to my car, I reflected on the strange turns life could take. Just 24 hours earlier, Victoria Hargrove had been one of the main obstacles in Sophia's path. Now she was asking for help to remove those same obstacles for other students. It wasn't a complete transformation. Those rarely happened outside of movies. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings were enough. When I returned home, I found Sophia at the dining table with her laptop open, video chatting with someone I didn't recognize. A young man with bright blue hair and glasses who appeared to be explaining something with enthusiastic hand gestures. "Mom," Sophia called when she saw me. "Come meet Miguel. He's one of the developers at Neuroverse. Ms. Matsuo connected us this morning." I leaned into frame and waved at the screen. Miguel grinned and waved back. "Your daughter is a legit genius, Mrs. Reynolds," he said. "We've been reviewing her code together. It's going to change everything about how we approach adaptive learning." Sophia blushed but looked pleased. "Miguel has been working on a similar project from the hardware side. We think we can integrate our approaches." "That's wonderful," I said, marveling at how quickly things were moving. Less than a day into this new reality, and Sophia was already collaborating with professional developers, already being treated as a peer rather than a problem. "I'll let you two continue," I said, squeezing her shoulder gently. "We need to leave for our meeting in about an hour, okay?" She nodded, already turning back to the screen, already immersed in a world where her mind was valued precisely because of how it worked, not despite it. As I moved around the house, gathering documents we'd need for the meeting, I found myself pausing at the small collection of family photos on our living room wall. David grinning with baby Sophia on his shoulders. 8-year-old Sophia proudly holding up a science fair project. The two of us on her 16th birthday, arms around each other, tired but smiling. So many struggles captured between those frozen moments. So many nights of doubt and fear and exhaustion. So many times I'd wondered if I was doing enough, fighting, hard enough, supporting her properly. Now, listening to her animated discussion with her new colleague in the next room, I realized that all of it, every battle, every tear, every moment of fierce advocacy, had been leading to this. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not just for Sophia, but for all the children who would benefit from her unique way of seeing the world. And maybe that was the point all along. Maybe the greatest gift we can give our children isn't protection from struggle, but the unwavering belief that their differences are not deficits but potential sources of world-changing innovation. That the very things that make them outliers in one context might make them leaders in another. That sometimes, the most brilliant stars are the ones that refuse to follow the expected path across the sky. 6 months later, on a crisp December morning, I stood at the back of an auditorium much larger and more modern than the one at Westridge High. The sleek Neuroverse Institute campus sprawled around us, a collection of innovative buildings nestled among the autumn trees of the Massachusetts countryside, their architecture deliberately designed to accommodate diverse sensory and cognitive needs. The audience was a mixture of tech industry leaders, education specialists, neuroscience researchers, and investors, all gathered for the Neuroverse Innovation Showcase, where the company's newest technologies would be unveiled. The excitement in the room was palpable, conversations humming with anticipation. I adjusted my visitor's badge, still feeling somewhat out of place among these brilliant minds, despite my now established role as a curriculum development specialist in the education division. The transition from small-town elementary school teacher to contributing to cutting-edge educational technology had been exhilarating and occasionally overwhelming. "Nervous?" asked Dr. Ramirez, my colleague in the education division, as she took the seat beside me. "A little," I admitted. "It's her first major public presentation." Elena Ramirez nodded understandingly. "She'll be brilliant. They've been rehearsing for weeks." The lights dimmed, and Eliza Matsuo walked onto the stage, elegant and commanding as always in a perfectly tailored suit. She welcomed the audience warmly before launching into an overview of Neuroverse's mission to transform how technology interfaces with diverse cognitive patterns. "For too long," she said, her voice resonating through the hall, "we've expected human minds to adapt to technology. At Neuroverse, we believe it's time for technology to adapt to the full spectrum of human cognition." The audience applauded, and my heart swelled with pride at being part of this vision. After years of fighting against rigid systems, I was now helping to build flexible ones. My experiences as Sophia's advocate had given me insights that my more traditionally credentialed colleagues often lacked, the lived reality of navigating a world designed for neurotypical minds. "Today," Ms. Matsuo continued, "we're unveiling several innovations that represent significant leaps forward in adaptive technology. But I'm particularly excited about our centerpiece project, which began with an anonymous submission to our Young Innovators program just 10 months ago." A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. This technology has the potential to revolutionize how we approach education for neurodivergent learners by creating truly responsive interfaces that adapt in real time to individual cognitive patterns. She smiled. "To explain this breakthrough, I'd like to introduce the primary architect of the system, someone who joined our team as an apprentice this summer and has rapidly become an essential voice in our development process. Please welcome Sophia Reynolds." The applause was polite but reserved as Sophia walked onto the stage. Unlike Ms. Matsuo's polished presence, my daughter moved with the slightly uneven gait that emerged when she was focusing intensely on something else. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a Neuroverse company polo, shirt with jeans, the standard attire for the development team rather than the business formal of the executives. She looked so young standing there, just 19 and facing a room full of industry leaders. Yet, as she reached the podium, I could see the confidence in her posture. Not the practiced charisma of someone trained in public speaking, but the natural assurance of someone who deeply understood her subject. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "I'm going to talk to you about adaptive interface technology, but first, I want you to try something." She glanced toward the back of the hall, and the screens around the auditorium suddenly displayed a paragraph of text. "Please read this passage silently," she instructed. The audience dutifully began reading what appeared to be a standard excerpt about neural networks. After about 15 seconds, Sophia continued. "Now, here's the same passage as someone with severe dyslexia might experience it." The text on the screen suddenly shifted, letters rearranging, flipping, blurring in real time. Words seemed to move across the screen. Spacing became irregular. A murmur ran through the crowd as people struggled to make sense of the distorted text. "Frustrating, isn't it?" Sophia said. "Now imagine this is every book, every website, every form, every email you've ever tried to read. Imagine being told the problem is that you're not trying hard enough." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Traditional assistive technology tries to compensate for these differences using standardized adjustments, text-to-speech, color overlays, different fonts. These tools help, but they're fundamentally still making the person adapt to the technology, just with a few more options." She clicked to the next slide, showing a complex diagram of interconnected nodes. What if, instead, the technology could adapt to each unique brain in real time? What if it could learn exactly how your specific neural pathways process information and adjust accordingly as you use it? For the next 20 minutes, Sophia explained the system she had developed, a sophisticated algorithm that combined eye-tracking technology, response patterns, neurological feedback, and machine learning. To create interfaces that evolved with the user, she discussed technical specifications, neuroscientific principles, and practical applications with a clarity and depth that had the technologists in the room leaning forward in their seats. I understood perhaps 60% of the technical details, but I understood 100% of what this meant. My daughter, who had been dismissed and underestimated for most of her educational life, was now teaching some of the brightest minds in technology how to think differently about cognitive diversity. "The implications extend far beyond education," she explained as she neared the end of her presentation. "Imagine workplace productivity tools that adapt to individual cognitive styles, medical interfaces that accommodate different processing needs, entertainment that adjusts its pacing and presentation based on neurological feedback." She paused, looking out over the audience with a seriousness beyond her years. "But for me, the most important application will always be education. Because I know what it's like to be the kid who's falling behind, who's trying harder than anyone else in the room, but still can't make the letters behave. I know what it's like to have a mind full of ideas you can't express in the formats demanded of you." The room was completely silent now, every person fully engaged. "And I know what it's like when someone finally sees you, really sees you, and gives you the tools to show what you can do." Her eyes found mine in the audience, and she smiled. "That changes everything." As Sophia concluded her presentation, the applause was immediate and thunderous. People rose to their feet, some calling out questions, others already discussing implications with their neighbors. Eliza Matsuo returned to the stage, beaming with pride as she stood beside my daughter. "What you've just witnessed," she told the still applauding audience, "is only the beginning. The prototype system Ms. Reynolds has described will begin limited field testing in select schools next month, with broader implementation planned for next fall." She gestured to a group of people in the front row. "We're honored to have representatives from the Department of Education here today, who have expressed interest in making this technology available to public schools nationwide, particularly in underserved communities." More applause, even more enthusiastic. I found myself wiping away tears as I clapped. Sophia looked momentarily overwhelmed by the response, but then composed herself and nodded in acknowledgement. As the presentation transitioned to the next speaker and attention shifted away from Sophia, I watched her slip backstage. I knew from her texts earlier that morning that despite her outward composure, she had been extremely anxious about the presentation. Public speaking had never been her strength, and the significance of the event had added tremendous pressure. I slipped out a side door and made my way backstage to find her. When I finally located her in a quiet hallway, she was sitting on a bench, eyes closed, hands moving in the steady rhythm of the self-regulation technique she'd developed years ago. "Sophia?" I said softly, not wanting to startle her. Her eyes opened, and the smile that lit her face was so genuine, so pure. It transported me back to when she was a little girl discovering something fascinating for the first time. "Mom, did you see? They actually got it. They really understood." I sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Of course they did. You explained it brilliantly." "No, not just the technology." She turned to face me fully, her eyes intense. "They understood why it matters. I could feel it in the room. They weren't just thinking about market potential or technical specifications. They were thinking about all the kids like me who might get a fair chance now." I hugged her tightly, unable to express in words the pride that threatened to burst my heart. This was my daughter, my extraordinary, resilient, world-changing daughter, who had transformed every obstacle into a stepping stone, every moment of exclusion into a mission for inclusion. The door at the end of the hallway opened, and Eliza, Matsuo, appeared. "There you are," she said, approaching us with a warm smile. "Sophia, there are at least a dozen people who want to speak with you, including the Secretary of Education. Are you up for it?" Sophia took a deep breath. "Yes, just give me 2 minutes." Ms. Matsuo nodded and retreated discreetly. When she was gone, Sophia turned back to me. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot today," she said quietly. "About what he would say if he could see all this." I smiled, my own thoughts having drifted to David several times during the presentation. He would say he knew it all along, that from the moment you were born, he could see that brilliant mind of yours working in ways that would change the world. She nodded, touching the silver star pin that she still wore every day, now affixed to her company lanyard. "He never doubted me. Neither did you, even when I doubted myself." "That's what parents are supposed to do," I said simply. "See the truth of who their children are, even when no one else can." "Not all parents do, though." Her voice was thoughtful. "I've been reading the letters from the initial beta testers, the kids who've been using early versions of the system. Some of their stories." She shook her head. "So many of them never had anyone who believed in them. They just internalized what they were told about being slow or lazy or not trying hard enough." "Which is exactly why your work matters so much," I reminded her gently. "It's not just about the technology. It's about changing the narrative, showing that different isn't deficient." She nodded, standing up with renewed determination. "You're right. Let's go talk to the Secretary of Education." As we walked back toward the main hall, we passed a wall of windows overlooking the campus. Snow had begun to fall, large flakes, drifting lazily from a pearl gray sky, beginning to dust the modern buildings and winding paths below. "Did I tell you about the letter from Westridge High?" Sophia asked, pausing by the windows. "No. What letter?" "Vice Principal Hargrove wrote to thank me for the beta version we provided." Apparently, they've completely restructured their learning support program based on your consultations. They're one of our most enthusiastic test sites. I hadn't expected that. While I'd provided some remote consulting to Westridge as promised, I'd been skeptical about how deeply they would actually implement the changes. Really? That's surprising. She specifically mentioned a freshman named Aiden who's apparently a lot like me, brilliant with robotics and programming, but really struggles with traditional academics. She said he's flourishing with the new system. Sophia smiled wryly. She also apologized again, very formally, for failing to recognize and support my potential. Better late than never, I suppose, I said. Sophia nodded. That's what I thought too. But then I realized something important. What's that? Sometimes people need to see change to believe it's possible. She gestured toward the auditorium where the buzz of excited conversation could still be heard. All those education experts and policymakers in there, they've been working in the same system for decades, seeing the same problems, applying the same insufficient solutions. They needed to see something dramatically different to shake them out of those patterns. I considered this, impressed as always by my daughter's capacity for empathy and big-picture thinking. That's a very generous perspective. Not generous, practical. Her expression was earnest. If we want to change how the world sees neurodiversity, we can't just focus on the kids who need help now. We also have to change the minds of the people running the systems, even the Victoria Hargroves of the world. The wisdom in her words struck me deeply. For years, I had focused my energy on protecting Sophia from a system that didn't understand her, on creating a safe space where she could thrive despite the obstacles placed in her path. That work had been necessary and vital. But now, Sophia was doing something even more powerful. She was transforming the system itself, making the world more accessible not just for herself, but for countless others. When did you get so wise? I asked, only half joking. She laughed. Probably around the 3rd grade, but no one was listening to me then. We continued toward the auditorium where her future, and the futures of so many children like her, was waiting to be shaped. As we walked, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. There had been so many moments when it would have been easier to accept the limitations others tried to place on Sophia. So many times when the fight seemed too hard, the barriers too high, the future too uncertain. But we had persisted, one day at a time, holding fast to the conviction that her different way of thinking wasn't a deficit, but a gift that simply needed the right conditions to flourish. The aftermath of the showcase exceeded even our highest expectations. Sophia's presentation triggered a cascade of interest from educational institutions, tech companies, and government agencies. The initial field testing expanded from 20 schools to over 100 within the first 3 months. Early data showed remarkable improvements in engagement, comprehension, and self-confidence among neurodivergent students using the adaptive system. But the most meaningful feedback came in the form of letters, emails, and videos from the students themselves. A 13-year-old with severe dyslexia who read an entire novel independently for the first time. A high school senior with ADHD who finally found a way to organize her thoughts and completed college applications she never thought possible. A 9-year-old autistic boy who discovered he could express complex ideas through the system's visual interface when words failed him. Each success story reinforced what we had always known, that behind every label of learning disabled or special needs or at risk was a unique mind with untapped potential, waiting for the right tools to shine. 1 year after that snowy December morning, I stood in the auditorium of PS 118 in the South Bronx, a school serving one of New York City's most disadvantaged communities. The classroom where I stood was one of the first in the nation to be fully equipped with Neuro versus adaptive learning system, made possible by a federal grant aimed at supporting underserved neurodivergent students. The room looked nothing like a traditional classroom. Instead of rows of identical desks, it featured flexible workstations that could be adjusted for standing, sitting, or movement. Some stations had privacy shields for students who needed reduced sensory input. Others were configured for collaborative work. Each station featured a customizable interface that would adapt to the individual student using it. "What do you think?" asked the principal, Ms. Jackson, as she watched me taking it all in. "It's incredible," I said honestly. "When I was teaching, I could only dream of resources like this." She nodded, her expression a mixture of pride and determination. "We have the highest percentage of students with IEPs in the district. For years, we've been trying to serve them with minimal resources and outdated approaches. She gestured around the room. "This is going to change everything." "That's the goal," I agreed. "Though the technology is only part of the equation, the teacher's understanding and approach matter just as much. Which is why we're so grateful. You're here to lead the training," she said. "Having someone who's been on both sides, as an educator and as a parent, makes all the difference." As we spoke, teachers began filtering into the room for the professional development session I would be leading. They carried coffee cups and notebooks, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to enthusiasm. I understood their caution. Many had seen educational initiatives come and go, each promising to be revolutionary, most failing to deliver meaningful change. Many had struggled for years to meet the diverse needs of their students without adequate support or resources. They had every right to be wary of another promised solution. But I also understood something they didn't yet, that what we were offering wasn't just another teaching tool or curriculum adjustment. It was a fundamental shift in how we approached learning differences, one that had grown directly from the experiences of those who had been failed by traditional systems. As the session began, I shared Sophia's story, not the polished version, from press releases or promotional materials, but the messy, painful, beautiful truth of our journey. I told them about the years of struggle, the teachers who didn't know how to help her, the system that wasn't designed for minds like hers. I showed them examples of her early work, brilliant ideas trapped in the confines of standardized assignments, her intelligence obscured by the very tools meant to assess it. And then I showed them where she was now, leading a development team at Neuroverse, presenting at international conferences, testifying before congressional committees on educational technology and accessibility. I showed them the system she had created and the thousands of students whose lives were already being transformed by it. "The technology you'll be learning to use today didn't come from traditional educational research or corporate R&D, I explained. It came from a student who was labeled a failure by those who couldn't see past their own limited definition of success. It came from a mind that processes information differently and, because of that difference, could see solutions that others missed." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each teacher. "The students in your classrooms who struggle the most with traditional methods might be the very ones with the most to offer. If we can create environments where their unique cognitive patterns are seen as valuable rather than problematic." By the end of the day-long training, the initial skepticism had given way to cautious optimism. Teachers who had started the day with crossed arms and guarded expressions were actively engaged, asking questions, exploring the system, discussing how it might help specific students in their classes. As they filed out, many stopped to share their thoughts or ask additional questions. One veteran teacher, who had been particularly reserved at the start, hung back until she was the last one remaining. "I've been teaching special education for 27 years, she said, her voice quiet but intense. "I've seen so many of my students internalize the idea that there's something wrong with them, that they're broken somehow." She gestured to the adaptive workstations. "If I'd had something like this from the beginning, if they could have seen that the problem wasn't them but the tools they were given, She shook her head, emotion evident in her eyes. Well, I just wanted to thank you and your daughter. This matters. Later that evening, as my taxi navigated through the congested New York streets toward my hotel, I called Sophia to update her on the training. Despite her increasingly demanding schedule, she always made time for these calls, eager to hear firsthand how the technology was being received by educators. They got it, Soph, I told her, especially once they understood where it came from, that it wasn't just designed for neurodivergent students, but by someone who knows that experience from the inside. That's always made all the difference. She agreed. When people realize it's not charity or theory, but practical solutions designed by the very minds the system failed. We chatted about the specific feedback I'd received, about adjustments that might make the system even more effective in high-needs schools, about the upcoming expansion to additional districts. The conversation was a seamless blend of mother-daughter, connection and professional collaboration, a new dimension of our relationship that I treasured. As we were about to say goodbye, Sophia added, "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you. I got a call from Westridge High today." About the system? No, about the graduation ceremony next spring. They want me to be the commencement speaker. I laughed in disbelief. Seriously? The same school where Vice Principal Hargrove publicly called you a failure less than 2 years ago? The very same. I could hear the smile in her voice. Apparently, I'm now their most distinguished alumna. They're even creating a scholarship in my name for neurodivergent students pursuing STEM fields. The irony was almost too perfect. Are you going to do it? There was a thoughtful pause before she answered. I think I will. Not for them, but for any kid sitting in that audience who might be feeling now like I felt then, who needs to see that there's a future where their different way of thinking isn't just tolerated, but valued. As I hung up, I gazed out at the city lights blurring past the taxi window, reflecting on the extraordinary journey we had taken, from the quiet struggles of our small-town life to this expanding ripple of change affecting thousands of lives. From fighting for basic accommodations to helping reshape how educational systems approach neurodiversity. The path hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been tears and setbacks, moments of doubt and periods of despair. But through it all, we had held on to one essential truth: that every mind has value, that different doesn't mean less, that the most powerful innovations often come from those who see the world through a unique lens. And perhaps that was the most important lesson in our story. Not that success eventually came to Sophia despite the obstacles, but that her success came precisely because of her different way of processing the world. The very characteristics that had been labeled as deficits in school had become her greatest strengths in creating solutions that more conventional thinkers had missed. As parents, as educators, as a society, our task wasn't to force every mind into the same mold, but to create environments where diverse cognitive patterns could all flourish, where a struggling student might be seen not as a problem to fix, but as a unique thinker with contributions only they could make, where a young girl labeled a failure at graduation might one day return as a celebrated innovator, having changed countless lives by transforming her greatest challenges into her most powerful gifts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.